Grace Walker's hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the doorknob, not from fear of what she was about to see, but from the terrible certainty that she was already too late. The smell hit her first. Gasoline. Sharp and chemical, seeping under her bedroom door at 2:17 a.m. like a warning she should have heeded months ago. Grace had smelled danger before. In the bruises shaped like fingerprints on 4-year-old Emma's arms, in the way 5-year-old Carter flinched when Victoria's heels clicked down the hallway, in the cold hatred she'd seen flash across the fiancé's face when the children laughed. But gasoline in a billionaire's mansion? Gasoline near the children's bedroom? That wasn't just danger. That was death wearing expensive perfume and a diamond engagement ring. Grace threw open her door and ran barefoot across the cold marble floor, her 28-year-old body moving faster than it ever had. The grand staircase stretched endlessly before her. 14 steps. She counted them every morning when she cleaned. Tonight they felt like 14 miles. Her thin cotton nightgown caught on the banister. She yanked it free, tearing the fabric, not caring. Behind her, the grandfather clock in the foyer chimed twice. 2 a.m. Malcolm wouldn't be home for another hour. The children were alone upstairs. Alone with whatever monster had poured gasoline in a house full of sleeping souls. Subscribe before it's too late. Stories like this save lives. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Black smoke poured from under the children's bedroom door like demon's breath. Grace's lungs seized. She pressed her palm against the wood, hot, blistering hot. Inside, she heard crackling. The sound of something beautiful being devoured. She thought of Emma's drawings taped to the wall, Carter's stuffed bear named Mr. Whiskers, the tiny shoes lined up by the window. All of it burning. But worse, infinitely worse, she thought of the 2 small bodies in their beds, the children who called her name instead of their father's, who saved her the last cookie at snack time, who were the only reason she hadn't quit 3 months ago when Malcolm dismissed her warnings about Victoria. Grace kicked the door with everything she had. Her bare foot connected with solid oak. Pain exploded through her ankle. The door didn't budge. She kicked again. Again. On the 4th kick, something cracked, her foot or the door frame, she couldn't tell. The door swung inward. Fire greeted her like a living thing. Flames crawled up the princess pink curtains Emma had begged Malcolm to buy. Orange tongues licked at the ceiling, peeling back the expensive wallpaper in blackened strips. The smoke was thick, suffocating, turning the room into a vision of hell. Grace dropped to her knees where the air was clearer. Through the haze, she saw them. Emma's crib was surrounded by a ring of fire. The 4-year-old stood pressed against the bars, her blonde hair wild, her face streaked with soot and tears. She wasn't screaming. She'd stopped talking 6 months ago when Victoria moved in, and even now, facing death, she was silent. Her blue eyes found Grace's, wide, terrified, trusting. Those eyes said what her voice couldn't: save me. Please. Carter's crib was engulfed worse. 5 years old and still sleeping in a toddler bed because he had nightmares about losing his mother, about being alone. Now his worst fear was burning around him. He was awake, coughing, trying to climb over the rails, but the smoke had him disoriented. He stumbled, fell back. Grace watched him disappear behind a wall of flames and something inside her shattered. She didn't think. Thinking would have meant recognizing the impossibility, the danger, the fact that she was a 28-year-old housekeeper with $326 in her bank account and no reason to die for a billionaire's children. But Grace had never been good at mathematics when love was involved. She grabbed the fleece blanket from the rocking chair, the one she'd knitted for Emma last Christmas when Malcolm forgot, and plunged it into the water pitcher on the dresser. The blanket came up soaked, heavy. Grace wrapped it around her arms and ran into the fire. The heat hit her like a fist. Her skin screamed. Her lungs filled with poison. But her hands found Emma's small body through the flames. She yanked the child from the crib, tucked her against her chest, and ran back through the burning room. Emma's arms locked around Grace's neck in a death grip. Grace kicked open the door to the hallway and dropped Emma onto the cool marble floor. "Stay here," Grace gasped, her voice raw from smoke. Emma nodded, her eyes huge. Grace turned back toward the inferno. She could barely see now. The smoke had thickened, turning the room into a black void punctuated by orange death. She heard Carter coughing somewhere in the darkness. She followed the sound like a prayer. Her hands found his crib. The wood was hot enough to blister her palms instantly. She felt her skin bubble and tear but didn't let go. She reached through the flames and grabbed Carter's pajama shirt. The blue one with rockets that he'd worn for 3 days straight because it made him feel brave. She pulled. He came tumbling into her arms, coughing, sobbing, clinging to her with desperate strength. Grace turned to run but the flames had closed the path to the door. She was trapped. Carter buried his face in her neck, whimpering. Grace looked around wildly. The window. She stumbled toward it, her vision swimming, her lungs screaming for air. She hit the glass with her elbow. It didn't break. She hit it again. The glass spiderwebbed. On the third hit, it shattered outward. Cool night air rushed in. Grace gasped, sucking in oxygen that tasted like life. Below, the lawn stretched 2 stories down. Too far to jump with a child. But beside the window, the thick vines Victoria had complained about, they make the house look cheap. Malcolm clung to the brick. Grace didn't hesitate. She wrapped Carter tighter against her chest, climbed onto the windowsill, and grabbed the vines. They held. Barely. Grace climbed down one-handed, her burned palms leaving bloody prints on the leaves. Carter's small body shook against her. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you, baby. Don't look down." Her feet hit the grass. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the lawn with Carter still clutched in her arms. Behind her, Emma had made it down the main staircase and was running across the grass toward them, her nightgown flapping like white wings. Grace lay on the cold ground, gasping, her whole body shaking. Carter and Emma curled against her sides like parentheses around a sentence that had almost ended in tragedy. Above them, flames shot out of the broken window, turning the night sky orange. In the distance, sirens wailed. The fire trucks arrived first. Then the ambulances. Then a black Mercedes pulling into the circular driveway so fast it left skid marks on the pristine pavement. Malcolm Reed stumbled out of his car still wearing his 3-piece suit from the late business meeting. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled. His shoes cost more than Grace's monthly rent. But his face looked like a man who'd just seen his entire world nearly disappear. He ran across the lawn and dropped to his knees beside his children. Emma and Carter launched themselves at him, sobbing, clinging. Malcolm's arms wrapped around them, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You're alive," he kept saying. "You're alive. You're alive." Grace watched from where she lay on the grass, her burned hands cradled against her chest, her body too exhausted to move. Malcolm looked at her over the children's heads. His eyes were wet with tears. Grace had never seen a billionaire cry. "You saved them," he whispered. Grace didn't answer. She didn't have the strength. A paramedic knelt beside her, wrapping her hands in gauze, murmuring something about second-degree burns and nerve damage. Grace barely heard. She was watching Emma, who'd been silent for 6 months, finally speak. Grace jumped into the fire for us, Daddy. She didn't leave us. Malcolm's face crumbled. He reached toward Grace, but before he could speak, the fire marshal approached with a tablet in his hands. His expression was grim. "Mr. Reed, I need you to see something." Malcolm stood slowly, reluctantly releasing the children into a paramedic's care. The fire marshal turned the tablet screen toward him. "We pulled the security footage. The fire was deliberately set. Accelerant was poured around the cribs." Malcolm stared at the screen, his face going pale. Grace watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to horror as he played the footage once. Twice. 3 times. The fire marshal's voice was flat, professional. "Sir, someone entered your children's room at 1:47 a.m. with a gas can. She poured gasoline in a deliberate pattern designed to trap them. This wasn't an accident." Malcolm's hand started shaking so violently he nearly dropped the tablet. His voice came out strangled. "Who?" The fire marshal turned the screen one more time. On it, clear as day, was Victoria. Malcolm's fiancée. The woman he'd planned to marry in 2 weeks. The woman he'd trusted with his children's lives. She was carrying a red gas can. Her face was blank. Emotionless. Calculated. She poured the gasoline like she was watering plants. Malcolm watched her walk out of the children's room at 1:53 a.m. 6 minutes later, the first flames appeared on the security footage. Don't let this happen to someone you love. Subscribe and stay aware. Comment below, where are you watching from? The fire marshal's next words cut through the night air like a blade. "Mr. Reed, we know who did this. And we know exactly where she is right now." Malcolm refused to believe it until the detective showed him the airport surveillance footage. Boarding gate 14. Terminal C, Victoria stood in line wearing oversized sunglasses and a black trench coat he'd never seen before. She carried a Louis Vuitton overnight bag, one of the 17 pieces of luggage she'd accumulated during their 6-month relationship, all purchased with his credit card. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her posture was relaxed, almost bored, like she was heading to a spa weekend instead of fleeing the scene of attempted double murder. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. Less than 2 hours after she'd poured gasoline around his children's beds and left them to burn. Malcolm sat in the police station's cold interrogation room, his expensive suit reeking of smoke, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Detective Barnes pushed the laptop closer. "Keep watching, Mr. Reed." On screen, Victoria reached the gate agent. She smiled, that radiant smile that had captivated Malcolm at a charity gala 8 months ago, the smile that made him believe he could love again after Catherine's death. The gate agent scanned her ticket. "First class to Paris. One way. Departure time, 4:15 a.m. We apprehended her at 4:03, Detective Barnes said. 12 minutes before takeoff. When we searched her bag, we found $200,000 in cash, jewelry from your personal safe, and her passport. She was never coming back, Mr. Reed." Malcolm's throat closed. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't process. The woman sleeping in his bed last night, the woman he'd introduced to his business partners, the woman wearing his grandmother's engagement ring, had tried to murder his children and vanish like smoke. "I need to see her," Malcolm whispered. "That's not advisable. I need to see her." Subscribe now, you won't believe what happens next. Detective Barnes led him down a fluorescent-lit corridor to interview room B. Through the two-way mirror, Malcolm saw Victoria sitting at a metal table, still wearing the sunglasses, her manicured nails drumming an impatient rhythm on the surface. She looked annoyed, not terrified. Not guilty. Just inconvenienced, like she'd been pulled aside for a random security check. Malcolm pushed through the door before the detective could stop him. Victoria looked up. For 3 seconds, neither spoke. Then she removed her sunglasses slowly, deliberately, and Malcolm saw her eyes. Cold. Flat. Empty of everything except irritation. "You were supposed to be in Chicago until tomorrow," she said. Her voice carried no remorse, no panic. Only accusation, as if he'd somehow ruined her plans by coming home early. Malcolm's legs nearly gave out. He gripped the edge of the table. "You tried to kill my children. Your children." Victoria laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That's all they ever were, wasn't it? Yours. Your precious Emma and Carter. Your dead wife's legacy. Never ours. Never mine. They're 5 and 4 years old. They were in the way." Victoria leaned forward, her beautiful face twisting into something ugly. "Do you know what it's like? Playing second to 2 brats who look at you like you're the villain. They loved that maid more than they'd ever love me. You loved them more than you'd ever love me." Malcolm felt bile rising in his throat. "So your solution was to burn them alive? My solution was to start over. Clean slate. You and me, Malcolm. No baggage. No reminders of St. Catherine. Just us and your billions." She smiled, and it was the smile of a stranger. "We could have been happy." The detective stepped forward, placing a hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "Mr. Reed, please step outside." But Malcolm couldn't move. He was staring at Victoria, seeing her clearly for the first time. The woman he'd trusted. The woman he'd brought into his home. How had he missed this? How had he been so blind? "Grace tried to warn me," he said quietly. 3 months ago. She showed me bruises on Emma's arms. She told me you locked the children in closets. I didn't believe her." Victoria's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been fear. That maid was always in the way. Always watching. Always judging. I should have gotten rid of her first. Malcolm turned and walked out. Behind him, Victoria called after him, "You're going to regret this, Malcolm. You're going to be alone forever. Those children will never let you love anyone else." The door closed, cutting off her voice. Malcolm leaned against the corridor wall, his chest heaving. Detective Barnes appeared beside him with a paper cup of water. Malcolm's hands shook so violently he couldn't hold it. "The fire marshal found the gas can in her car trunk," the detective said quietly. "Along with the gloves she wore. We have her on security footage, fingerprints, everything. The district attorney is filing attempted murder charges, 2 counts. Will she go to prison? With the evidence we have?" "Absolutely." Malcolm nodded numbly. Prison. Victoria would go to prison. But his children would carry the scars forever. Emma, who'd already lost her mother at birth. Carter, who'd been sleeping 20 feet away from the woman who wanted him dead. How could Malcolm ever make them feel safe again? Like and subscribe, this story isn't over yet. Dawn was breaking when Malcolm finally left the police station. He drove home in silence, past the early morning joggers and newspaper deliveries, past the manicured lawns of his wealthy neighborhood where tragedies weren't supposed to happen. His mansion came into view, massive, imposing, crowned with emergency vehicles and yellow caution tape. Half the second floor was blackened, windows blown out, his daughter's pink curtains hanging in charred strips. This was supposed to be a home. He'd built it for Catherine, filled it with everything money could buy. But he'd failed to fill it with the one thing that mattered, safety. Malcolm found his children in the guest house, a smaller building behind the pool where visiting relatives stayed. A nurse sat nearby, monitoring them. Emma and Carter were curled together on a sofa, wrapped in hospital blankets, watching cartoons with hollow eyes. When they saw Malcolm, they didn't run to him. They tensed, scanning the space behind him. Looking for Victoria. "She's gone," Malcolm said, kneeling in front of them. "She's never coming back. I promise." Emma's blue eyes filled with tears. "You promised she was nice. You said she'd be our new mommy." The words gutted him. Malcolm had promised. He'd stood in this very room 6 months ago and told his children that Victoria would take care of them, that they'd be a family. He'd dismissed their fear as adjustment. He'd ignored every warning sign because he'd been too lonely, too desperate, too selfish to see the truth. "I was wrong," Malcolm whispered. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong about her." Carter's small voice was barely audible. "Grace tried to tell you. You didn't listen." Another knife to the heart. His 5-year-old son understood what Malcolm had refused to see. Grace had been the only one protecting them all along. "Where is Grace?" Emma asked suddenly, looking around. "I want Grace. She's at the hospital." "Her hands," Malcolm's voice cracked. "She burned her hands saving you. The doctors are taking care of her." "We want to see her," Carter said firmly. It was the most decisive Malcolm had heard him sound in months. Malcolm checked his watch. 7:30 a.m. He'd been awake for 29 hours straight, but sleep was impossible. "Get dressed. We're going to the hospital." They found Grace in room 412, her hands wrapped in thick white bandages, elevated on pillows. She was awake, staring out the window at the sunrise. When she heard them enter, she turned her head. Her eyes widened. Emma and Carter broke away from Malcolm and rushed to her bedside. Grace couldn't hug them, couldn't move her hands. But the children pressed against her sides carefully, so carefully, like she was made of glass. "You jumped into the fire," Emma whispered. "For us." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Of course I did, baby. Of course I did." Malcolm stood in the doorway, watching. This woman, this 28-year-old housekeeper he'd barely noticed, who earned $18 an hour, who slept in a room smaller than his walk-in closet, had given everything for his children. While he'd been blind to the monster in his bed, Grace had been the guardian at the gate. A doctor appeared beside Malcolm, clipboard in hand. "Are you family?" "Yes," Malcolm said before he could think. "She's family." The doctor nodded. "The burns are severe. 2nd and 3rd degree across both palms and several fingers. We've done what we can, but there's significant nerve damage. She'll need months of physical therapy, possibly surgery. Even then, she may never regain full function." Malcolm felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What does that mean?" "It means she won't be able to perform tasks requiring fine motor skills. Cooking, cleaning, writing, these will be extremely difficult, if not impossible. Grace couldn't work anymore. She'd sacrificed her livelihood to save his children." The doctor continued reviewing charts, oblivious to Malcolm's dawning horror. "Her insurance should cover most of the hospital stay, but physical therapy can be expensive. She'll want to look into payment plans." "I'll pay for everything," Malcolm interrupted. "Whatever she needs. All of it." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "That's generous. Are you her employer?" Malcolm looked at Grace, still surrounded by his children, whispering soft reassurances that everything would be okay. She'd lost her mother 6 months ago. Lost her hands last night. Lost her ability to earn a living. And she was comforting his children. "No," Malcolm said quietly. "I'm the man whose children wouldn't be alive without her." Remember what matters most, like and subscribe. 3 days later, Grace was discharged. Malcolm insisted she stay in the guest house while she recovered. Grace refused. She packed her single suitcase and called a taxi to her apartment. Malcolm intercepted her at the door. "Grace, please. You can't take care of yourself right now. Your hands will heal," Grace said firmly. Her bandages were smaller now but still covered most of her fingers. "I've been taking care of myself my whole life, Mr. Reed. I don't need charity." "This isn't charity. It's," Malcolm struggled for words. "It's the least I can do." Grace met his eyes. She looked tired. Older than 28. "With respect, Mr. Reed, the least you could have done was listen 3 months ago when I told you your fiancé was hurting your children. The least you could have done was protect them yourself." The words landed like punches. Malcolm stood speechless as Grace walked past him to the waiting taxi. Emma and Carter watched from the window, tears streaming down their faces. "Grace!" Emma screamed, pounding on the glass. "Don't go. Please don't go." Grace paused at the taxi door. Her shoulders shook. But she didn't turn around. She got in the car and disappeared down the driveway, leaving Malcolm alone with his children, his mansion, his billions. And the devastating realization that he'd failed everyone who mattered. That night, Emma stopped talking again. Grace's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator hadn't worked in 8 months. She climbed the stairs slowly, her bandaged hands cradled against her chest, using her elbows to push open the heavy door to her floor. The hallway smelled like fried food and mildew. Music thumped through thin walls. A baby cried somewhere above her. This was the world Malcolm Reed had never seen, the world his housekeeper returned to every night after polishing his marble floors and dusting his crystal chandeliers. Grace fumbled with her keys, finally managing to unlock her door using her wrist. Inside, her studio apartment was exactly as she'd left it 3 days ago, a twin bed pushed against one wall, a kitchenette with a hot plate, a small table with one chair, and a window overlooking a parking lot. No marble. No chandeliers. No space for anyone but herself. On the table sat a stack of unpaid bills. Rent. Electric. The last installment on her mother's funeral expenses. Grace stared at them, then looked at her bandaged hands. The doctor's words echoed in her mind: significant nerve damage, may never regain full function, months of physical therapy. She couldn't cook. Couldn't clean. Couldn't write. The only skills she had, the skills that kept her fed and housed, were useless now. Grace sat on her bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. After that, she would figure out what came next. She always did. When her mother got sick, Grace figured it out. When the medical bills piled higher than she could climb, she figured it out. When she took a job in a mansion where a beautiful woman was slowly torturing 2 children and no one believed her, she figured it out. She would figure this out too. But those 5 minutes, she let the tears come. Someone knocked on her door. Grace wiped her face with her forearm and stood. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Chen from across the hall, holding a casserole dish. Grace opened the door. Mrs. Chen, a 67-year-old widow who'd lived in this building for 30 years, took one look at Grace's bandages and gasped. "Oh, honey. I saw the news. That fire, those children, that was you." Word traveled fast in neighborhoods like this. Grace nodded. "You're a hero, Mrs. Chen said, pushing the casserole into Grace's hands, or trying to. Grace couldn't grip it. The dish wobbled. Mrs. Chen caught it quickly and carried it inside, setting it on the table. Chicken and rice. I'll bring more tomorrow. You just rest. Mrs. Chen, I can't. You can and you will. The older woman's eyes were fierce. That billionaire should be paying for everything. You saved his babies. Grace thought of Malcolm's offer to let her stay in the guest house. Charity. Guilt money. He tried. I said no. Mrs. Chen frowned. Pride doesn't pay rent, Grace. Neither does pity. After Mrs. Chen left, Grace tried to eat the casserole using a spoon wedged awkwardly between her bandaged fingers. Most of it ended up in her lap. She gave up, suddenly exhausted, and lay down on her bed fully clothed. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Grace, it's Malcolm. Please call me. The children are asking for you. Grace deleted it. Another buzz. Emma isn't speaking again. Carter won't sleep. They need you. Grace turned off her phone. Like and subscribe. The story gets harder before it gets better. 3 months earlier, Grace had tried to save Emma and Carter from a different kind of fire. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Malcolm was in Singapore for a business conference. Victoria had been living in the mansion for 3 months. Grace arrived at noon to prepare the children's lunch and found Emma sitting on the kitchen floor, holding her left arm at an odd angle. Sweetie, what happened? Grace knelt beside the 4-year-old. Emma's blue eyes were glassy with unshed tears. She didn't answer. She barely spoke anymore, not since Victoria moved in, but she let Grace examine her arm. Purple fingerprint-shaped bruises circled her bicep. 4 on one side. 1 on the other. An adult's grip. Grace's stomach turned. Did someone grab you? Emma nodded almost imperceptibly. Who? The little girl's eyes darted toward the ceiling. Toward Victoria's bedroom. Grace found Carter in the playroom, building a tower with blocks. His face was streaked with dried tears. Where's Victoria? Grace asked gently. Out, Carter whispered. She said if we tell Daddy, she'll lock us in the dark place forever. What dark place? Carter pointed toward the hallway closet. Grace opened it. Inside, beneath the coats and vacuum cleaner, were 2 small pillows and a blanket. The children had been locked inside long enough to need bedding. Grace pulled out her phone and photographed the bruises on Emma's arm, the makeshift bed in the closet, everything. Then she called Malcolm. He answered on the 4th ring. Grace? Is everything okay? No, Mr. Reed. I need to show you something about Victoria and the children. Can this wait? I'm about to enter a meeting with. It's important. Malcolm sighed. Okay. Send me a text. I'll look when I have a moment. Grace sent the photos with a message. Victoria is hurting Emma and locking the children in closets. Please come home. Malcolm replied 2 hours later, those bruises could be from anything. Kids play rough. And maybe Victoria had a reason to give them a timeout. She's adjusting to motherhood. Give her time. Grace stared at the message, her heart sinking. She tried calling. It went to voicemail. When Malcolm returned from Singapore 3 days later, Grace waited until the children were napping and approached him in his office. Mr. Reed, we need to talk about Victoria. Malcolm looked up from his laptop, irritation flickering across his face. Grace, I got your texts. I spoke with Victoria. She explained everything. What did she say? That Emma got the bruises playing on the swing set. That she put the children in the closet for 10 minutes because they were fighting and needed to calm down. It's called discipline, Grace. Not abuse. Mr. Reed, please. I'm telling you something is wrong. The children are terrified. The children are adjusting to having a mother figure. Of course they're acting out. Malcolm closed his laptop with more force than necessary. Victoria also mentioned that you've been undermining her authority. Telling the kids they don't have to listen to her. That's not acceptable. Grace's mouth fell open. That's not true. I would never. Victoria has been nothing but patient with Emma and Carter. Yes, she's firm, but that's what they need. Structure. Boundaries. Not someone coddling them and encouraging them to see her as the enemy. I'm trying to protect them. You're the housekeeper, Grace. Malcolm's voice was cold now. Not their mother. Not their therapist. Victoria is going to be their stepmother. You need to respect that. Grace felt the words like a slap. She stood, her legs shaking. With respect, Mr. Reed, if something happens to those children, it won't be because I didn't warn you. She walked out before Malcolm could respond. Subscribe now, you need to see how this unfolds. After that conversation, Grace started sleeping with her bedroom door cracked open, listening. Victoria grew bolder. She would pinch Carter's ear when he spilled milk, twist Emma's wrist when she resisted brushing her teeth, speak to them in whispers laced with threats Grace could only partially hear. But she was careful. Never around Malcolm. Never leaving marks visible in photographs. Always with explanations ready. They're manipulating you, Grace. They want attention. They're testing boundaries. Grace documented everything in a journal hidden under her mattress. Times. Dates. What she witnessed. But documentation meant nothing if no one would listen. One evening, Grace overheard Victoria on the phone in her walk-in closet. The door was closed, but the heating vent carried sound from Victoria's room down to Grace's small quarters off the kitchen. These brats are insufferable. Victoria's voice dripped venom. Constantly clinging to that maid, constantly looking at me like I'm the villain. Malcolm barely pays attention to me anymore, it's all about them, his precious perfect children from his precious perfect dead wife. A pause. Then, no, I'm not backing out. The wedding is in 2 months. Once we're married, I'll send them to boarding school in Switzerland. Malcolm won't fight me on it. He's too guilty about Catherine to deny them anything, including getting them the best education. And once they're gone, I'll have him all to myself. And his money. Grace's blood ran cold. She wanted to burst upstairs, to confront Victoria, to grab the children and run. But where would she go? She had no legal standing. She was just the housekeeper. If she took the children, she'd be charged with kidnapping. So she stayed. And watched. And waited. And prayed Malcolm would wake up before it was too late. He didn't. Not until Grace had to run into a burning building to save the children he should have protected. Back in her apartment, Grace woke to hammering on her door. She stumbled off her bed, disoriented. The clock read 11 p.m. She'd slept for 6 hours. More hammering. Grace. Please. Open the door. Malcolm's voice. Grace considered pretending she wasn't home. But the hammering continued, desperate, and Mrs. Chen's voice joined in. Someone answer. People are trying to sleep. Grace opened the door. Malcolm stood there still wearing yesterday's smoky suit, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild. Behind him, Mrs. Chen peered from her doorway disapprovingly. Emma stopped talking, Malcolm said without preamble. Completely. Won't eat. Won't sleep. The child psychologist said she's traumatized, not just from the fire, but from everything before it. From Victoria. From me not protecting her. His voice cracked. She drew a picture today. Want to know what it was? Grace said nothing. It was you. Standing between her and flames. She labeled it, "Grace saved us." Daddy didn't. Malcolm's face crumpled. She's right. You tried to tell me 3 months ago and I dismissed you. I called you just a housekeeper. But you were the only one who saw the truth. The only one who loved my children enough to sacrifice everything. Why are you here, Mr. Reed? Because I was wrong. Because I failed you and I failed them. Malcolm dropped to his knees in the hallway. Mrs. Chin gasped. I'm not here to offer you money or charity or a place in my guest house. I'm here to beg. My children need you. Not as an employee. As family. Please, Grace. Come back. Not for me, for them. Grace looked at this man kneeling on her stained hallway carpet, this billionaire who'd built an empire but couldn't see the monster sleeping beside him. Part of her wanted to slam the door. The other part, the part that loved Emma and Carter with a fierceness that surprised even herself, knew she'd already made her choice the night she ran into the fire. Get up, Grace said quietly. Malcolm stood. I'm not coming back for you. I'm coming back because those children have lost enough. Grace grabbed her jacket with clumsy bandaged hands. But things are going to change, Mr. Reed. You're going to listen. You're going to be the father they need. And you're going to stop being so afraid of being alone that you put your loneliness ahead of their safety. Malcolm nodded, tears streaming down his face. Whatever you need. Whatever it takes. Grace walked past him toward the stairs. Then let's go bring your children home. Like and subscribe, this family's story isn't finished yet. Grace moved into the guest house on a Tuesday morning with nothing but her suitcase and a prescription bottle of painkillers she couldn't open by herself. The guest house was larger than her entire apartment, 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a bathroom with heated floors. Malcolm had cleared out the guest furniture and replaced it with things Grace actually needed, a special ergonomic bed for her recovery, grab bars in the shower, utensils with thick handles she could grip with her bandaged hands. He'd thought of everything except the one thing that mattered most to Grace, her dignity. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her wrapped hands. The gauze was thinner now, 6 days post-fire, but the pain had intensified as nerve endings woke up and remembered they'd been destroyed. The doctor's prognosis echoed in her mind, 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Permanent nerve damage. You'll need extensive physical therapy. Even then, you may never regain full dexterity. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Emma stood in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit Grace had won for her at a church carnival 2 months ago. The 4-year-old hadn't spoken since Grace returned yesterday, but her blue eyes held 1,000 words. Can I stay with you? Emma whispered, the first word she'd spoken in days. Grace's throat tightened. Of course, baby. Come here. Emma climbed onto the bed and curled against Grace's side, careful not to touch her hands. They sat in silence, listening to the fountain outside and the distant sound of Carter laughing in the main house with Malcolm. For the first time since the fire, Emma's small body relaxed. Victoria said you'd leave us, Emma murmured. Like Mommy did. Grace's heart shattered. Your mommy didn't leave you, sweetheart. She got sick. That's different. But you did leave. After the fire. I came back, didn't I? Emma nodded against Grace's shoulder. Are you going to leave again? Grace wanted to promise forever. But her burned hands throbbed with the reminder that forever had conditions. She couldn't work. Couldn't support herself. She was dependent on Malcolm's charity, and that made her a temporary guest, not family, no matter what Malcolm claimed. I'm here now, Grace said carefully. That's what matters. It wasn't the promise Emma needed, but it was the only honest answer Grace could give. Like and subscribe, this family still has a long road ahead. Physical therapy started on Thursday. Malcolm insisted on driving Grace to the rehabilitation center despite her protests. He waited in the lobby for 2 hours while a therapist named Patricia guided Grace through exercises designed to restore function to her damaged hands. Squeeze the ball, Patricia instructed, placing a soft rubber sphere in Grace's palm. Grace tried. Her fingers trembled, barely curving around the object. Pain shot up her arm. The ball dropped. Again, Patricia said gently. Grace tried 17 times. The ball dropped 17 times. By the end of the session, Grace was drenched in sweat, fighting tears, her hands screaming. Patricia made notes on a clipboard. You're showing good effort. This will take months, possibly years. Don't get discouraged. But Grace was discouraged. She was 28 years old and couldn't hold a rubber ball. Couldn't button her own shirt. Couldn't open a jar or tie her shoes or do any of the 1,000 small tasks that made a person independent. Malcolm drove her home in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, he finally spoke. The physical therapist said your insurance won't cover all the sessions. I've already arranged to pay for everything. Mr. Reed. It's not charity, Grace. It's the least I can do after what you sacrificed for my children. The least you could do is stop reminding me I'm a charity case. The words came out sharper than Grace intended. She softened her tone. I appreciate everything. Truly. But every time you pay for something, every time you drive me somewhere, every time you look at me with guilt in your eyes, it reminds me that I'm not here because I belong. I'm here because I'm broken and you feel responsible. Malcolm's jaw tightened. You're here because my children love you. Because they need you. And when my hands heal. When Emma and Carter don't need me anymore. What then? Grace met his eyes. I don't have a home to go back to. I quit my lease because I couldn't afford rent without working. My savings are gone. Everything I owned fit in one suitcase. So yes, Mr. Reed, I'm grateful. But gratitude doesn't make me less aware that my entire existence right now depends on your generosity, and that terrifies me more than the fire did. She got out of the car before he could respond. That evening, Grace forced herself to cook dinner for Emma and Carter, simple pasta, nothing fancy. It took her 40 minutes to boil water because she couldn't grip the pot properly. She burned herself twice on the stove. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce too salty. But when she set plates in front of the children, they ate like it was a feast. Grace makes the best food, Carter announced through a mouthful of noodles. Malcolm, who'd joined them in the guesthouse kitchen, looked at the simple meal and then at Grace's trembling, bandaged hands. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or shame. Grace wasn't sure which. Subscribe now, the hardest trials are still coming. 2 weeks after the fire, Detective Barnes called with news about Victoria's case. Malcolm put the phone on speaker so Grace could hear. The district attorney is moving forward with 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree, Barnes said. With the security footage and Grace's testimony, it's a strong case. But Victoria's legal team is claiming diminished capacity. Temporary insanity brought on by emotional distress. Malcolm's fist clenched on the table. She planned this. She bought the gas can 3 days before the fire. That's not insanity. Her lawyers will argue she was mentally unstable, driven to a breaking point by your relationship. They're painting her as a victim of emotional abuse, saying you manipulated her, made her feel unwanted, prioritized your children over her until she snapped. Grace felt sick. That's not true. I know. But juries are unpredictable. If they buy the insanity defense, Victoria could get a reduced sentence, possibly just psychiatric treatment instead of prison time. The call ended. Malcolm sat in stunned silence. Grace watched him process the possibility that Victoria might not face real consequences, might not serve time for nearly murdering his children. The injustice of it hung in the air like smoke. I should have protected them, Malcolm said finally. I brought her into our lives. I ignored every warning sign. If she walks free because of some insanity plea, it's because I gave her the opportunity in the first place. You're not responsible for her choices. Aren't I? Malcolm looked at Grace with haunted eyes. You tried to warn me 3 months ago. You showed me bruises on Emma's arm. You told me Victoria was dangerous. And I called you just the housekeeper. I dismissed you because listening would have meant admitting I'd made a terrible mistake. It would have meant being alone again. His voice broke. I was so afraid of loneliness that I endangered my own children. Grace had spent 3 months angry at Malcolm for not listening. But watching him now, drowning in guilt and regret, she felt something shift. He'd made terrible choices. But he was also a widower who tried to rebuild a family and chosen wrong. He wasn't evil. Just broken in different ways than she was. We can't change the past, Grace said quietly. But we can make sure Emma and Carter feel safe now. That's what matters. Malcolm nodded, but the guilt didn't leave his eyes. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note in Malcolm's handwriting. This isn't charity. It's payment for 3 months of trying to protect my children when I wouldn't. It's compensation for the hands you'll never get back. It's an apology I don't deserve to make but need to anyway. Malcolm. Grace stared at the check. $50,000. More money than she'd ever seen. Enough to pay off her mother's medical debt, start fresh somewhere, build a life independent of Malcolm Reed's guilt-driven generosity. She could leave. Take the money and disappear. Find a new job doing something that didn't require intact hands. Start over in a city where no one knew her as the maid who ran into a fire. But then Emma appeared in the doorway, holding a drawing she'd made. Crayon pictures of Grace, Emma, and Carter holding hands under a rainbow. At the top, in Malcolm's handwriting, because Emma had asked him to write it, were the words, "Our family." Grace looked at the check. Then at the drawing. Then at Emma's hopeful face. She folded the check and put it in her pocket. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Should we hang it on the refrigerator?" Emma beamed and grabbed Grace's hand, carefully, so carefully, and led her to the kitchen. The check stayed in Grace's pocket for 3 days before she finally opened a bank account and deposited it. Not because she'd decided to leave. But because having it gave her something she'd lost the night of the fire, the option to choose her own future instead of being trapped by circumstance. Like and subscribe, the truth about family is coming. A week later, Grace woke at 3 a.m. to Carter screaming. She ran to the main house in her nightgown and found him thrashing in bed, tangled in sheets, sobbing. The fire. Emma's still in the fire. Malcolm was already there, trying to calm him, but Carter fought against his father's arms. "Where's Grace? I need Grace." Grace knelt beside the bed. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Carter grabbed for her, and Grace winced as his small hands gripped her healing burns. But she didn't pull away. She held him while he sobbed about flames and smoke and thinking Grace hadn't come back for him. Malcolm watched from the doorway, his face unreadable. After Carter finally fell asleep, Malcolm walked Grace back to the guest house. The night air was cool, the mansion grounds eerily quiet. "He asks for you now," Malcolm said. "Not me. When he's scared, when he's hurt, it's your name he calls." There was no resentment in his voice. Just tired recognition of a truth he couldn't change. "I'm their father. But you're the one who saved them. How do I compete with that?" "You don't compete," Grace said. "You just love them. That's all children really need, someone who shows up and stays." Malcolm stopped walking. "Is that what you're doing? Staying?" Grace looked at the guest house, temporary shelter, borrowed space, a place that wasn't really hers. Then she looked at the main house, where two children slept who'd lost one mother to death and another to evil, who'd found safety in the arms of a housekeeper who'd never meant to become family. "I don't know," Grace said honestly. "I'm still figuring out what staying would even mean." It was the truth. But truth didn't make the uncertainty any easier to bear, for either of them. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters the morning Victoria's trial began. Malcolm had to shield Emma and Carter with his body as they pushed through the crowd, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. "Mr. Reed, do you believe your fiancé intended to kill your children? How does it feel knowing you brought a murderer into your home? Are you suing for custody of the assets?" Grace walked behind them, invisible to the media circus. Just as she preferred. But when a reporter shoved a microphone too close to Emma's face, Grace stepped between them with such fierce protectiveness that the man stumbled backward. Inside the courthouse, the Reed family sat in the front row of the gallery. Malcolm wore a charcoal suit. Grace wore a simple navy dress, the only one she owned that seemed appropriate for testifying. Emma and Carter had stayed home with a nanny after much debate, but their presence haunted the courtroom anyway. Every detail of the trial centered on them, the cribs, the gasoline, the flames, the terror. Victoria entered in handcuffs, wearing a pale pink dress that made her look vulnerable and young. Her blonde hair was styled softly around her face. She'd lost weight during her 3 weeks in jail, her collarbones sharp beneath expensive fabric. She looked like a victim, not a predator. Malcolm's hands clenched on the wooden bench. Grace placed her bandaged hand gently on his arm. "Breathe," she whispered. The prosecution opened with security footage. The courtroom fell silent as the grainy video showed Victoria entering the children's bedroom at 1:47 a.m., carrying a red gas can. She moved methodically, pouring gasoline around 2 small cribs where children slept. Her face was emotionless. Calculating. The timestamp in the corner ticked forward. At 1:53 a.m., Victoria left. At 1:59 a.m., the first wisps of smoke appeared on camera. A woman in the jury box wiped tears. A man shook his head in disbelief. Victoria's defense attorney, a slick man named Gregory Chen who charged $800 an hour, stood for cross-examination. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed was not the act of a cold-blooded killer. It was the desperate action of a woman driven to the brink of madness by emotional neglect and psychological abuse." Malcolm's jaw tightened. Grace felt fury rising in her chest. Chen continued. "My client spent 6 months trying to build a family with a man who could never love her. A man still obsessed with his deceased wife. A man who prioritized his children's affection for the household staff over his fiancée's feelings. Victoria Hart is not a monster. She's a victim of circumstances that broke her mind. Like and subscribe, justice doesn't always look the way we expect." The prosecution called Grace to the stand on day 3. She walked to the witness box, her bandaged hands visible to everyone. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Reeves, asked Grace to describe the night of the fire. Grace recounted waking to the smell of gasoline, kicking down the door, finding Emma and Carter surrounded by flames. Her voice remained steady until she described carrying Carter through the window, feeling her skin blister and tear. "Why did you go back for him?" Reeves asked. "You'd already saved Emma. The fire was spreading. You could have died." Grace looked directly at the jury. "Because leaving a child to burn isn't something a human being does. It's something a monster does." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Victoria stared at Grace with cold hatred. Chen stood for cross-examination. "Ms. Walker, isn't it true that you were jealous of my client's relationship with Mr. Reed?" Grace blinked. "What? You lived in that mansion for 6 months. You spent more time with Mr. Reed's children than he did. Isn't it possible you resented Victoria for taking the role you wanted, mother to those children, wife to that wealthy man? That's absurd. Is it? You tried to sabotage their relationship 3 months before the fire. You showed Mr. Reed fabricated evidence of abuse. You told him Victoria was dangerous. All lies designed to drive them apart." Malcolm shot to his feet. "That's not true." Grace tried to protect. The judge's gavel cracked. "Mr. Reed, sit down or I'll have you removed." Chen smiled. "Ms. Walker, did you or did you not attempt to convince Mr. Reed that my client was abusing his children?" "I showed him bruises on Emma's arm. Bruises that could have come from anywhere. Children fall. They play rough. But you interpreted innocent marks as evidence of abuse because you wanted Victoria gone." Grace's hands trembled. "I wanted the children safe. Or you wanted Victoria's place in that family." Chen leaned closer. "Isn't it true that you're now living in Mr. Reed's guest house? That he's paying for your medical care? That you've essentially replaced Victoria in every way except the title? Subscribe now, the truth is about to shatter everything." The courtroom buzzed. Malcolm looked stricken. Grace felt the world tilting beneath her. "I live in the guest house because I have nowhere else to go," Grace said quietly. "My hands were destroyed saving those children from the fire your client set. I didn't want Victoria's life. I just wanted Emma and Carter to survive it." Chen's smile faded slightly. He returned to his seat. Reeves stood for redirect. "Ms. Walker, did Victoria Hart pour gasoline around those children's cribs?" "Yes." "Did she set the fire that nearly killed them?" "Yes." "And did you risk your life to save them?" "Yes." Grace held up her bandaged hands. "These are the proof." The jury stared at Grace's hands, scarred, damaged, a permanent testament to the cost of heroism. Several jurors looked away, unable to hold her gaze. Malcolm testified on day 4. He described the 6 months with Victoria, her coldness toward the children, his blindness to the warning signs, the night he came home to find his kids on the lawn covered in soot with Grace barely conscious beside them. "Why didn't you believe Grace when she warned you?" Reeves asked. Malcolm's voice cracked. "Because believing her would have meant admitting I'd failed. That I'd brought danger into my children's lives because I was too lonely to see clearly. It was easier to dismiss Grace than face my own failure." The honesty was devastating. Even some reporters in the back wiped their eyes. Chen cross-examined. "Mr. Reed, you're a billionaire, correct?" "Yes." "And my client had access to your accounts during your engagement?" "Joint access, yes." "If she wanted your money, she could have simply taken it and left. Why would she risk a murder charge?" Malcolm frowned. "I don't know. Unless," Chen pulled out a document. "There was a prenuptial agreement stating that Victoria would receive nothing if the marriage ended before 2 years. Correct?" Malcolm's face drained of color. "Yes, but..." "So Victoria couldn't just leave with your money. She'd get nothing. But if she became a widow with 2 orphan stepchildren?" She'd inherit everything. Isn't that the real motive here? Not madness, but calculated greed. The courtroom gasped. Grace felt her stomach drop. This was worse than they'd thought. Chen continued. My client didn't act from insanity, ladies and gentlemen. She acted from desperation, the desperation of a woman trapped in a loveless arrangement, watching the man she loved prioritize everyone else. Yes, she made a terrible choice. But it wasn't the choice of a monster. It was the choice of a human being pushed beyond her limits. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Malcolm sat in the hallway with Grace, his head in his hands, waiting. Grace's hands throbbed with phantom pain. She'd run out of painkillers 2 hours ago but didn't mention it. When the verdict came, the courtroom filled again. Victoria stood emotionless as the jury foreman read, "We find the defendant guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree." Malcolm exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Grace closed her eyes. Emma and Carter were safe. Victoria would never hurt them again. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Victoria was led away in handcuffs, screaming, "I loved you, Malcolm. I loved you and you destroyed me. This is your fault." Outside the courthouse, Malcolm stopped on the steps. Reporters swarmed, but he ignored them. He turned to Grace. Chen was right about one thing. You did take Victoria's place. You became what she never could be, family. Grace shook her head. I'm not family, Mr. Reed. I'm just someone who couldn't walk away. Isn't that what family is? Malcolm asked. People who stay. Grace didn't answer. Because she still didn't know if she was staying or just surviving until she figured out where else to go. Like and subscribe, this story ends where you least expect. That night, Grace sat alone in the guest house and opened her bank account on her phone. The $50,000 Malcolm had given her sat untouched except for one withdrawal, the full payment of her mother's medical debt. She'd done what she needed to do, honored her mother's memory by clearing the burden that had haunted her for a year. Now she had $43,000 left. Enough to start over somewhere new. Enough to leave. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Carter stood in the doorway in dinosaur pajamas. Can I sleep here tonight? I had a bad dream. Grace made room on the bed. Carter curled against her side, his small hand resting carefully on her arm. Within minutes, he was asleep. Grace stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of a 5-year-old boy who trusted her to keep the nightmares away. This wasn't her child. This wasn't her life. This wasn't supposed to be her future. But somewhere between running into a fire and sitting in a courtroom with bandaged hands, Grace had stopped knowing where the lines were anymore. 6 months after the trial, Malcolm sold the mansion. The real estate agent couldn't understand why a billionaire would sell a 15,000-square-foot estate with hand-carved marble staircases and a 10-car garage for a modest 4-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood where kids rode bikes on the sidewalk and neighbors borrowed sugar. But Malcolm didn't explain. He just signed the papers and walked away from the monument he'd built to prove his success. The new house had scuffed hardwood floors and a kitchen with laminate countertops. The backyard was small but had an oak tree perfect for climbing. Emma claimed the bedroom with yellow walls. Carter wanted the one closest to Grace's room. Grace herself stood in the doorway of what Malcolm called her space, not the guest room, not the maid's quarters, just hers, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Belonging, maybe. Or the beginning of it. What do you think? Malcolm asked, appearing beside her with a box labeled Grace, kitchen items. He'd packed her things himself, insisted on it, treated her possessions with the same care he'd give his own. Grace looked at the room, modest but comfortable, with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the backyard where Emma and Carter were already exploring. "It's good," she said quietly. Then, more honestly, "It's home." Malcolm's eyes glistened. He set down the box carefully. "I need to tell you something. The company, I'm stepping back. Promoting my COO to run day-to-day operations. I'll stay on the board, but I'm not going back to 16-hour days and business trips to Singapore." He paused. "I missed too much already. I won't miss more." Grace studied this man who transformed from an absent billionaire into a father who packed school lunches and knew his children's favorite bedtime stories. They need you present more than they need you successful. "I know that now." Malcolm hesitated. "Grace, I've been thinking about everything you've given up, everything you've sacrificed. The $50,000 wasn't enough. It could never be enough. So I've set up a trust fund in your name. $2 million. It's yours, no strings attached. Whether you stay or leave, whether." "Stop." Grace's voice was firm. "I don't want your guilt money, Mr. Reed. It's not guilt." "Yes, it is. You keep trying to pay me for saving Emma and Carter because you can't forgive yourself for not protecting them first." Grace met his eyes. "But love isn't a transaction. Family isn't something you buy. If I stay, it's because I choose to, not because you wrote a check large enough to obligate me." Malcolm looked stricken. "Then why are you here? Why did you come back after I dismissed you, after I failed you?" Grace glanced toward the backyard where Emma was showing Carter how to climb the oak tree, her blonde hair catching sunlight, her laughter carrying through the window. "Because those kids lost their mother before they could remember her. They survived a monster who wanted them dead. And somewhere in all that trauma, they decided I was safe. I don't have the right to take that safety away just because staying is complicated." Like and subscribe, this is where everything changes. "Is it really that complicated?" Malcolm asked quietly. "Staying? You don't understand what it's like," Grace said. "I was your housekeeper. I cleaned your toilets and folded your underwear. Now I'm living in your house as what, a nanny? A family friend? Your children's pseudo-mother. I don't have a title. I don't have a role. I'm just Grace, the woman with burned hands who can't quite figure out where she fits." Malcolm absorbed this. What if you didn't need a title? What if you just lived here as yourself, and we figured out the rest as we go? People don't work like that, Mr. Reed. Everyone needs to understand relationships. Your friends, your business partners, they all ask who I am. And I never know how to answer. Then tell them you're family. Family doesn't get paid a salary." Grace held up her scarred hands, still healing after months of therapy. "Family doesn't owe their place at the table to a heroic act. Family just is." "Then just be," Malcolm said. "No salary. No obligations. Just Grace, living here because this is your home and we're your people. That's all." Grace wanted to believe it could be that simple. But experience had taught her that nothing involving money and class and burned hands that told a story people couldn't stop staring at was ever simple. Emma burst through the back door, breathless. "Grace! Come see." I climbed all the way to the top branch. Carter followed, grass-stained and grinning. "She's so high up. Like a bird." Grace let the children pull her outside, their small hands warm in hers, careful with her scars, always so careful. Malcolm followed, and together they stood beneath the oak tree watching Emma perched on a high branch, fearless and laughing. "I can see everything from up here," Emma called down. "The whole neighborhood. I can see forever." Grace's throat tightened. 6 months ago, Emma hadn't spoken at all. Now she was climbing trees and shouting joy at the sky. Subscribe now, the ending will touch your heart. That evening, Grace cooked dinner in the new kitchen, nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread, which was all her healing hands could manage. But Emma and Carter set the table without being asked, and Malcolm opened a bottle of sparkling cider for a first dinner in the new house toast. They sat together in the small dining room that couldn't fit more than 6 people, so different from the cavernous formal dining room in the mansion where they'd rattled around like ghosts. Here, they were close enough to pass dishes without stretching, close enough to hear each other breathe. Malcolm raised his glass. To new beginnings. Emma added, to Grace, who saved us. Carter chimed in, to our family. Grace's hand trembled as she lifted her glass. Family. The word hung in the air, fragile and terrifying and more precious than anything Malcolm's billions could buy. After dinner, Grace helped Carter brush his teeth while Malcolm read Emma a story. The mundane rituals of parenting, the routines Grace had once performed as an employee, felt different now. Lighter, somehow. Like she wasn't caring for Malcolm Reed's children, but for her children too. Later, after the kids were asleep, Grace found Malcolm sitting on the back porch watching fireflies blink in the darkness. She joined him on the weathered wooden steps. I used to think success meant building the biggest house, closing the most profitable deal, being the richest man in the room, Malcolm said softly. Catherine's death didn't teach me otherwise. Neither did raising Emma and Carter alone. I was still chasing bigger, better, more. It took almost losing them forever to understand what actually matters. And what's that? Grace asked. Malcolm looked at her. This. Right now. Sitting on a porch in a house that's worth a fraction of what I used to own, knowing my children are safe upstairs, knowing the woman who saved them is here by choice, not obligation. That's wealth. That's what I was searching for in all the wrong places. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know how to do this, Mr. Reed. Be part of a family. I've been on my own since my mother died. I don't know the rules. Then we'll make them up together. Malcolm smiled, the first genuine smile Grace had seen from him in months. And please, stop calling me Mr. Reed. It's Malcolm. Just Malcolm. Malcolm, Grace repeated, testing the intimacy of his first name on her tongue. It felt strange. But good strange. Like stepping into a future she'd stopped believing existed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance, listening to the distant sound of neighbors laughing on their own porches. This neighborhood wasn't gated or guarded. There were no marble floors or crystal chandeliers. But there was something better, the ordinary magic of a summer evening where nothing extraordinary happened except the quiet realization that healing was possible. Upstairs, Carter called out from a nightmare. Grace and Malcolm both stood, then looked at each other. Together? Malcolm asked. Grace nodded. Together. They climbed the stairs side by side, two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage of tragedy, bound together by the love of two children who'd survived what should have destroyed them. In Carter's room, Grace sat on one side of the bed while Malcolm sat on the other. Between them, Carter's small body relaxed as they both whispered reassurances that the monsters were gone, that he was safe, that love was bigger than fear. And in that moment, Grace finally understood what family meant. It wasn't about titles or roles or who paid for what. It wasn't about blood or legal documents or perfect definitions. It was about showing up. Staying. Choosing each other again and again, even when it was hard, even when the path forward wasn't clear. Like and subscribe, money can't buy what these three souls found. 3 years later, Grace stood in the same backyard watching Emma and Carter play. Her hands had healed as much as they ever would, scarred and stiff, but functional. She'd learned to adapt, to find new ways to do old tasks, to accept that some losses were permanent but didn't have to be defining. Malcolm appeared beside her, as he often did, drawn by the same magnetic pull of watching their children thrive. Because somewhere along the way, without legal papers or formal declarations, they'd become ours. Their children. Their family. Their miraculous second chance. Do you ever regret it? Malcolm asked. Staying. Grace thought about her old life, the studio apartment, the unpaid bills, the loneliness that had been her constant companion. Then she looked at Emma and Carter, now 7 and 8, arguing cheerfully about whose turn it was on the tire swing Malcolm had hung from the oak tree. No, Grace said honestly. I found something here worth more than anything I left behind. Malcolm took her scarred hand gently, carefully, the way he'd learned to do. So did I. I found you. And in that small backyard, in that modest house, surrounded by nothing more than love and laughter and the ordinary beauty of an ordinary life, Malcolm Reed finally understood the truth that had eluded him for 45 years. Money can buy a mansion, but not a home. It can buy engagement rings, but not devotion. It can buy cribs and toys and the finest education, but not the fierce courage of a woman who runs into fire for children who aren't hers by blood. The most valuable things in life, love, sacrifice, redemption, family, can't be purchased at any price. They can only be given. And received. And cherished with grateful, humble hearts that finally understand what wealth really means.